Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all very much for joining us on this webinar. It is now 2 o'clock Eastern Time, so we are going to get started. My name is Aditya Nag. I am the head of marketing at VanHack, and I also happen to be a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. However, the webinar today will be led by our senior immigration consultant, Karan Dhani. I'm going to hand it over to him in just a second. As I said on the chat, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have, and Karan will sort of walk you through the logistics of how we're going to ask questions. So without any further ado, thanks very much again for joining us, and I'm going to ask Karan to turn on his mic and camera and take us through this. All right, I see Karan's on. All right, Karan, all yours. I'm going to turn my camera and mic off, and I'm going to let you control this now.
Sure. Thanks, Aditya. Thanks for the intro. Thanks, everyone, also for joining and taking the time out of your day to spend time to learn a little bit more about the Global Talent Stream. It's a process of immigration that I love speaking about, just because I know there's a lot of hesitation sometimes and fear with immigration programs, because a lot of times they can be, I think there's a fear of the unfamiliar. So the goal of this webinar really is to get you guys a little bit more familiar with this process and take away some of those things that might prevent you from sort of using this great program that's been put in place. And I know there's a lot of acronyms, so we'll sort of get a better understanding of everything. And yeah, hopefully we'll use this in the future at some point. So as Aditya said, if there's any questions, like, feel free to post them out, and I'll take a time at some point in the presentation and just do some questions in the beginning and then some at the end as well. Yeah. So I think we should probably get started. My name is Karan, as Aditya mentioned. I'm an RCIC, so Regulated Canadian Immigration Consultant. I have been so for about 2 years now, but definitely have this is kind of my expertise, is the Global Talent Stream, although it's done applications, various applications throughout. Yeah, so let's sort of jump right into it. We'll just go over our agenda for today, at least. So the agenda being, we're going to kind of talk about LMIAs in general and what they are. So kind of give you a bit of a history, and then followed by jumping into the Global Talent Stream and some of the different categories that exist, some of the wages, some basically the requirements for the Global Talent Stream, and then the application process itself. A few questions that we get a lot for the Global Talent Stream, and then questions posed by you. So yeah, let's go forward and just kind of get into the LMIA process. So probably want to know what an LMIA is. So an LMIA is a labor market impact assessment. What this essentially is a way to assess in the local market to make sure that that there's no specific skills that you're hiring for and you aren't able to find them locally. So typically this is across industries. Some of your companies might be in tech, but sometimes you might be hiring for other positions. You can always apply for an LMIA if you have a restaurant or barbershop and you sort of can't find anyone locally. The idea being that it gives you the permission to hire from abroad. I'll just give you an example of what an LMIA approved looks like. It is a government document, so beware, it is very exciting, but this is what it looks like. You'll see there's this number here at the top, that's your LMIA number. This is, of course, not a real LMIA number, but and yeah, so this is at the end of your application. This is typically what you get, and this allows you to hire from abroad. All right, so let's talk about kind of the LMIA process before Global Talent Stream was introduced. So the Global Talent Stream is another type of LMIA application, but essentially it's a streamlined one. So let's just say there was a company that was looking to hire somebody from abroad. They would start by, this is before 2017, they would start by advertising. Those advertisements would need to be in place for the time that the LMIA was being processed. So there's also a cost of about $1,000 to that LMIA. The processing time for that as well is about 4 to 6 months. So typically you make the application, submit it, again, have advertising throughout, and takes about 4 to 6 months to get any sort of answer on it. The nice thing as well is that essentially beforehand, there was no real you would either get an approval or rejection. Whereas what happened was with Global Talent Stream is Canada noticed that, the government noticed that there were a few occupations that were in dire need in Canada, specifically tech occupations. And so the government put out this Global Talent Stream starting in 2017. And it's pretty close to when I became a consultant. I think it was made specifically for me. But after 2017, with this Global Talent Stream process, instead of the regular 6-month processing time, that got shortened down into 2 weeks. So they typically try to assess your application within that 2-week time frame. They also really work with you. They're not there to refuse your application. They want this application to be approved. And so any of they kind of work with you to make sure that the application is approved. Any of the requirements they're trying to get you to meet. And so they want a lower barrier to entry for these applications. And the nice thing is the cost is the same. So whether it was before 2017 or after 2017, same sort of cost. Just the main advantage is, and also no advertising. So advertisements don't have to take place. And again, processing time is quick. It's 2 weeks, which is unheard of. Before you'd sort of apply, it'd be a 6-month time frame. And then the second step is always to apply for the candidate's work permit. And that typically would take another 2 to 3 months. When the Global Talent Stream was introduced, they also shortened that down to a 2-week time frame as well. Okay, so this is kind of a breakdown of how the Global Talent Stream could be used. So if you already have a candidate, you can apply for an LMIA. And again, we'll show you the sort of what that looks like, that application process. But you'd apply for an LMIA, and then you submit the candidate's work permit with that approved LMIA, the example that I showed you before. Then they're able to relocate. Now, let's say you haven't found the candidate yet, but you know that you're in the interview process, you're in dire need, you're pretty close. You can actually start the Global Talent Stream process right away and apply for what's called an unnamed LMIA. So as long as you're planning on hiring somebody within the next 6 months, if you do apply for what's called an unnamed LMIA, once you get approved, you're fine to then use that LMIA and tap somebody's name to it once you've found the perfect candidate for yourself. The applications, once you do have an approved LMIA, they typically expire within 6 months. So you sort of want to make sure that you find the candidate and they apply for their work permit within those 6 months. Because otherwise that LMIA does expire. So, but it is nice to get the process started so that you save time on the back end. And just adding someone's name to it is a quick form. Takes about 5-6 business days usually through the Global Talent Stream for them to apply that name to it. And then same process, once you do have that candidate, send them this quick form, and they come back to you with applying for their work permit, and they can then relocate. All right, so there's two, let's talk a little bit more about the Global Talent Stream. There's 2 categories for the Global Talent Stream. The first is category A, and then the second one is category B. Most of the time, I'd say, category B is a lot more used, but we'll just touch on category A fairly quickly. But it's typically more for high-level managers and senior-level executives. So with the category A, you have to be referred to by one of the designated partners. And there are a list on the Global Talent Stream website of these designated partners in BC, like BC Tech, and VanHack has a few connections with some of these designated partners as well. But once they grant you access to be able to use this category, you're able to make the application. There are a couple of minimums that you sort of need to meet. So for instance, the salary being about $80,000 minimum for that candidate that you're hiring. They also must have an advanced degree or potentially have 5 years of experience at least. So they need to be professionals in that occupation. And then you're only allowed to have 2 of these applications per year, and they can assess a third one, but they may or may not allow it for the third one as well. I think the annual salary needs to be above about $120,000. So usually it would be 1 or 2 applications a year that you would do for this, and it is if you're specifically looking to hire high-level executives or managers. Again, this is not used super often, but if there is somebody you do want to bring in that is in this kind of position, Global Talent Stream would be one of the quickest ways to bring them over for sure. Okay, but let's go back to category B, so tech talent, which I'm sure most of you guys are here for. But for developers and tech talent, the salary really is dependent on the role and the position. So we'll talk about that shortly as well with wages with the global talent stream. And yeah, essentially, let's jump right into the different NOC codes and what they mean. So these are the different NOC codes that sort of fall into the Global Talent Stream program. What is an NOC code? It's just a code identifying a job position. So for instance, the ones that are probably used most frequently would be things like software engineers or developers. Those are 2173 and 2174. The distinction you'll notice, well, these codes have been sort of created a long time ago. I think it's over 20 years ago. And so what it breaks down to in terms of which NOC code it falls into is purely dependent, or should be dependent on the job duties more so than the position itself. So give you an example. If you in your organization call somebody a software developer, but they do the duties listed as software engineer, then the government will sort of ask that that person be put into 2173. And what ends up happening there is the minimum wages then sort of differ. So if you've made an offer to somebody in Vancouver, for instance, at 80,000 for a software developer, and they get assessed and say that this is too low, you'd either have to increase that wage or change their sort of duties. And I guess the idea is you're sort of only hiring for them to be able to do those duties. So the distinction between the two is a slight one, but is important to them. So I think this is kind of good information to know. So I'm just going to sort of get into it a little bit deeper. But the duties, you can kind of look at these duties online, but and sort of align your duties according to those. But the biggest distinction is software engineers would be people who usually complete the architecture, design of the software, whereas programmers and developers are simply doing the coding, testing, and maintaining the code. I am in no way a technical skilled person. However, this is sort of my interpretation of the job duties. So yeah, and there are a few other ones there that you'll notice. So there's info system analysts, there's computer systems information managers, which do happen often. And for any of these wages, so this is kind of the minimum wages for at least Vancouver and Toronto. How do you find the minimum wages? You would actually go into Job Bank and the Canadian government's Job Bank website, and you can type in the occupation name, so if it's just software developer, and it'll list out in each city, in each region actually, even the median wage for that region. What you'll actually get when you go to the website is you'll get a minimum wage, a median wage, and a high wage. So one of the criteria for this category B for tech professionals is that it needs to meet at least the median wage. So if that is, you'll see, it won't give you a salary, it'll give you more of like an hourly. So if the hourly is around, let's say $38.46 dollars an hour, you'd sort of extrapolate that based on the amount of hours that there are in the work week for your organization. You'd sort of want it to be at least a full-time position, so over 30 hours is fine. So between 30 to 40 hours. So if you're doing, let's say 40 hours on a 52-hour work week, you're looking at $80,000 salary. If I'm wrong in that math, I apologize. I don't have it in front of me, but this is just from my recollection. Yeah, hopefully, yeah, let's maybe just, we'll run through. I think if there's any questions, like feel free to write them down, and Ditya will sort of come at the end and maybe just present all those questions afterwards. Okay, so another big part of the Global Talent Stream application itself is the labor market benefit plan. Essentially what you're sort of promising to do as part of the LMIA process is, because you're hiring a temporary foreign worker from outside of Canada, there's a distinction that you're sort of going to have, there should be some benefit to the local labor market. Those benefits can come in various forms. These are some of the criteria that at least ESDC, which is the branch of the Canadian government that is specifically handling your LMI application for approval and refusal. So ESDC would usually recommend these kind of categories for a labor market benefit plan. And I'll show you an example shortly, but one of the mandatory requirements for the Global Talent Stream category B specifically, the mandatory one out of these is investments into skills and training. So the second one you see there. And then there's got to be 2 complementary benefits. So again, 1 mandatory of these, and then 2 complementary benefits. And then there's 3 parts to each of them. So for instance, you'd sort of want to explain which of these benefits that you're choosing, the target of each benefit, and finally, the way that you're sort of going to prove that you're in compliance with these with this plan. So the labor market benefit plan, it's usually a 2-year work permit that you're sort of applying for. So over those 2 years, it gets broken up into the first year and the second year. So what you're committing to doing is a plan for the first year and then a plan for the second year. To give you an example, if you're looking at job creation, the first year, you may say that you're willing to hire 2 people. And then in the second year, you're willing to hire 2 people or 3 people. And then ESDC will assess whether that it meets the requirements based on how many people you're actually trying to hire. And I'll show you an example of this to make it a little bit more clear. Actually, maybe I'll get into the example right now, and then I'll come back to the screen just to explain some of the other ones, because I think a visual would really help in the situation. So this is probably some of the more common benefits or plans that people companies usually commit to. So the first one being increasing investments into in-house skills and training. Again, that's a mandatory requirement. This can be done in different ways. So you can do personal development conferences or seminars and send your current staff, so people who are Canadian or PRs, to these type of conferences. You could do lunch and learns internally, but it would be things that you are committing to doing so that the local market can increase their skills. And so that's kind of one of the benefits of the Global Talent Stream is, although you're hiring abroad, the local market has, there's a lot of benefits to them. So skills and training would be one. Other things that kind of fall into investments into skills and training would be things like, so we said lunch and learns, conferences, co-ops and internships. So if you're offering a co-op position from one of the universities or colleges in Canada, you could qualify under that as well. But as I mentioned, there were 3 parts to it. So the first is which one you're choosing. So these guys have selected conferences and seminars. And then the second part is the target. So this company has allocated 5,000 towards these conferences for their number of employees that you see there, 6 in this case. So the first year would be a 2,500 commitment, and the second would be another 2,500 commitment over a 2-year period. And then the documents, in order to sort of prove that they've complied with this, would be invoices for the conferences. If you're doing lunch and learns, it might just be a spreadsheet showing the different times that you were able to do these lunch and learns and the costs associated with each one, how many people attended it. And again, so that each one has different documents that you can sort of use to prove it. Let's go into the next one, job creation, which is another one they really, really like, because of course you're adding to your company and giving jobs to the local market here. In this case, they've sort of allowed for this company to hire 2 Canadians and PRs between that same 2-year time frame, 1 in the first year and then 1 in the second year. These targets will sort of be dependent on how large the organization is, and some of it will also be based on your annual gross revenue that you sort of let them know that you have, and that's part of the application process. And in this case, they sort of are looking for redacted letters of offers from HR summary reports. So, you could say sometimes you can send in contracts, but the idea with this labor market benefit plan is that it's a discussion between your company and ESDC, and it's a negotiation. These targets have been made for just a single hire to this company. But if you were planning on hiring, let's say 2 people, they might ask for higher commitments, or 10 people might be higher commitments. What you can also do is with this LMBP, what ends up happening, let's say you've applied a first time and you've made a single hire, you've actually gone through all this process, you actually have a plan in place. If you decide to make a second hire through the global talent stream, almost always ESDC will ask you to renegotiate this labor market benefit plan. They'll always ask to renegotiate, but it is, I can't stress this enough, it is a negotiation. So you could say that my plan is, in our opinion, good enough. Of course, they're going to go back and have it reviewed, and sometimes I've seen it where they've said, no problem, actually, your plan is strong enough and we're okay. And in some cases, they'll say, you actually do need to increase this. So they might ask for maybe 2 per year or 3 per year, depending on how many people you're hiring. One little trick that you're able to do as well is if you know that in the next year, you're planning on hiring, let's say 10 people from who are temporary foreign workers, so people from abroad, what you could do is let them know that when you're on the first call, and just let them know we plan on hiring 10. So if we could make this labor market benefit plan for hiring 10 people, you might be committing to a bit more than you would for one person, but you wouldn't have to go through the process of negotiating it every time on every call. The advantage of that being, potentially your commitments could be higher when you're renegotiating every time, but also it just saves a lot of time. Essentially, they're just looking at the application at that point, making sure T's are crossed, I's are dotted, and then they would approve it. So instead of that 2-week time, I find that usually it gets done even in 1 week when the labor market benefit plan is already assessed at a higher level. So they'll have what they call slots, but they'll have slots for how many people you're trying to apply for. The last one I'll just talk about here is knowledge transfer. So this would be where the temporary foreign worker is passing on knowledge to the Canadian and PRs that you do have in your organization. So in this case, they're looking at lunch and learn seminars where knowledge will be passed down. The type of knowledge in this case was financial accounting software development. Again, over my head, so I should probably attend that lunch and learn as well. But they've committed to 4 this year and 4 the next year. And again, the way to document this would be a spreadsheet or similar document where the information part of that lunch and learn is in. So and how many people attended. That's kind of a labor market benefit plan. I think let's sort of go on to the actual documents that you need to submit for this application. As I said, I think a lot of people are afraid of, a lot of companies are sort of hesitant to go down this route because they're unsure of what sort of needs to be given. And I don't think immigration programs are specifically made to be difficult, I don't think. But I know when you go on the government websites, they can be, there's just a lot of text to get through. And so we're just trying to give you the most important parts of it so that it gives you the Coles notes to make it a little bit easier. So these are the forms to complete and the documents required. So let's go talk about forms first. So there's the main application form. You can look this up. It's an EM5624. It is a very boring form to fill out, but essentially there's 3 parts to it. The first part is just a bit of company information, when your company was started, your business numbers, and 2 primary contact people that ESD will reach out to. The second part is job offer information. So information regarding the job duties, the job title, how many people you're actually sort of trying to hire in that position, your current staff and what the wages range from for your current staff. So those are kind of some of the details that they ask for in the job offer details. And the third part of it is a labor market benefit plan. So it's good to have some sort of idea of what type of commitments you want to make, but that would be the third part to this application. So you'd fill all that information out. I think it's about 10 pages worth of stuff, but it's actually not that difficult once you sort of get through it. But I would start on that. And once you've done it once, a lot of information for the second time, you just port over into the new application. So the first time is always, I would say, the hardest. Now, if you are hiring more than one person, so if let's just say you're hiring 4 people and they are in the same position with the same wage, you can put all 4 people into that main application. But if you're hiring anybody, let's just say you're hiring 2 people with the same wage and same position, but 2 people are in the same position, but they're making a higher wage or lower wage, then you can fill out this annexure. It's a secondary document that you would send in along with it. And you can have an annexure for, so you could potentially do 10 people, and you could have 2 in the main application, 3 in one annexure, 3 in one annexure, and so and do it that way. So but essentially, yeah, multiple candidates with varying occupations, each one would need a different annex attached to it. If you're just hiring one, of course, it's just the main application that you would need. Okay, and then the required documents. I gotta just note here that the employment contract isn't necessarily a required document. It's just one that does just give a bit more information into the type of offer that you're actually making and see that the candidate has signed. So it just helps, I think, the application. And the candidate will need to sort of use that contract anyways in their work permit. So good to have. Okay, and then the 2 documents required though, these documents, ESD calls them business legitimacy documents, but essentially there's 2 parts to it. So one is that they want to make sure that you are an active company in Canada that's willing to, that does provide a good or service. In order to prove that part of it, you would want to use either a municipal or provincial business license. Your federal corporate incorporation certificate does not work. You'll need a municipal or a provincial one. I would actually skip the T4 summary of remuneration paid. That's typically, most companies don't really use that. There's only certain circumstances which you can, but if you do have accounting, PD7A, statement of accounts for current source deductions, that's the other document that we do use quite often to prove that, again, you have a good or service. The second half to business legitimacy is to make sure that the foreign worker, that your company can afford the foreign worker. And for that, there's another accounting document that's requested. It is the T2 Schedule 100 balance sheet and T2 Schedule 125 income statement. They'd want a recent year's balance sheet and income statement, but what they look at is, I forget exactly what line number it is, but they're going to look at the retained earnings. So I believe that's on the 125 statement, but the retained earnings need to be higher than the wage of the temporary foreign worker. So let's just say you're giving an offer of 100,000, then the retained earnings for your company need to be higher than 100,000. If you're hiring 2 people at 100,000 each, then the retained earning needs to be more than 200,000. If yours aren't, and I know a lot of tech companies run in a deficit, so if your company doesn't have those retained earnings, the other option is a letter of attestation. This letter should essentially, you can actually look for templates of letter of attestations online as well, but essentially it needs to be signed by a CPA or a lawyer. That CPA or lawyer could be part of your organization, but they need to confirm that, and I usually ask them to confirm that the company not only provides a good or service, but also can financially meet the obligations for the temporary foreign worker for the time that they are being requested for, so for a 2-year time frame. Once signed, a lot of times actually even just a letter of attestation, if it's attesting to this and this, would work on its own. But we just get most companies, I think, to the letter of attestation just to get that completed by a CPA and then submit that, because like I said, most companies either don't want to share their balance sheets and income statements, or just they are running a deficit and they don't want anyone to know. Okay, so those are some of the forms and documents. But that's it. Really, it's as simple as the main application form and then 2 business documents. You get that, and as long as you're meeting the wage requirement and the labor market benefit plan, that's your application for the global talent stream. Cool. So there's a few questions that some companies typically have. So one of them is what happens after an LMI is approved, which is a good question. And there might be another room for another webinar.
Hello, everyone. I think Karan may have had some technical issues there. So I see that he's back. Karan, you're back online and live. Do you want to share your screen again? I think it blinked out for a second there.
Oh, sure. Give me 1 second. Did we miss much? Have I been talking for half an hour and just to myself?
No, you had just opened the slide about the FAQs, and you were just starting to address what happens after the LMIA is issued. So we didn't really miss anything, and it just kind of blinked, but we don't see your screen right now either.
Oh, sorry, my screen's not visible?
No. What I can do is I can share my screen if that would help.
Sure.
So give me 1 second. Everyone on the call, sorry about that. Sometimes we have these technical issues that happen, but we will get you sorted in just a second. Right, if I am correct, you guys should be seeing my screen. Karan, can you see my screen? Karan? We may have lost Karan again. But all right, so I'll tell you what, I will continue the presentation, so because I don't want to waste anyone's time. And I will address these questions that Karan was talking about. So what happens after the LMIA is approved? So typically what happens after the LMIA is approved is the onus is on the employee to get their work permit approved and then get their visa and fly to Canada or travel to Canada and start working. And that's kind of where VanHack comes in. So if you're a company that's working with us and you've decided to hire a VanHack candidate or somebody who's come through VanHack, we take care of the entire process on the candidate side as well. So we'll help you get the LMI approved, and then we'll help the candidate get their work permit and make sure that they can, come to Canada and start working. And Karan and he's got a team of 3 or 4 people. Our global mobility team will work on that. So as a company, you really don't have to worry about running around with lawyers or consultants or anything like that. We take care of everything for you. Next question is what happens after 2 years? So typically, the work permits are granted for a couple of years, and what we've found most often is after 2 years, the vast majority of the people who've come through VanHack and have joined Canadian companies qualify for permanent residency, and they go on to become Canadian permanent residents, and then therefore they don't need work permits or anything like that anymore, and they can continue. They can just work for your company without any more paperwork required. So that is really a good thing, because as you can guess, a lot of the people who are trying to come through VanHack are approaching us because they want to move their lives to Canada. It's not just about getting a job here, it's also about moving here. So this process helps them become eligible for permanent residency, gets them a bunch of points, and then they can become PRs. And finally, the question is, what happens if I let the employee go or they quit? Well, in that case, from the employee's perspective, unlike some other countries, they do not have to immediately leave the country. So it's a little more, Canada's a little friendlier to them. So for whatever reason, if it doesn't work out and a foreign worker joins your company and they have to leave the company, or you have to let them go, they are allowed to stay in the country for the period of the approved work permit. So let's say the work permit was approved for 2 years, and after 6 months they unfortunately are unable to continue with you. They will be allowed to stay in Canada for the remainder of that period, so 18 months. However, they will not be allowed to get another job without getting a fresh LMIA and a fresh closed work permit. So they can't just quit your company and go start working for another company without going through the paperwork again. So in a sense, they are somewhat bound to the company. However, it is a lot friendlier, that they don't have to worry about packing their lives up and leaving if things don't work out within a matter of days or weeks. So they have some time to regroup and take care of things. And from your perspective, that you would need to, if you were hiring let's say you're hiring another foreign worker for that same role, you'd have to go through the LMI process again. But there's no real penalty as such that if you have to let go of an employee that you hired on an LMIA, the Canadian government isn't going to penalize you unless there's some sort of pattern of not using the resources properly or something like that. But that is not something that legitimate companies really face. So it's on both sides. It's fairly straightforward. And I guess that was the last slide. And once again, apologies to everyone for the technical difficulties that we had. But I hope that this webinar was useful to you. And if you have any questions, please contact us. There's Karan's email address right there. You can also visit vanhack.com. We do this live webinar once a month, so the next one will be now in March, and you can register for that. We'll email links to all of you who attended. So if you missed you weren't able to stay for the whole webinar, or you want to pass this along to a colleague or a friend, please feel free. We're happy to share information. And with that, I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and turn this off. Oh, Karan, I'm sorry. I see that you're back, but I don't know what's going on. So I think that, well, let's just, now that you're here again, if there are any questions, please ask us. I see that we have quite a few people on the webinar. So if there are any questions that anyone wants to ask, this is your time now. Please type it into chat and we will answer them as they come through. So we're just going to hang on and wait for people to ask questions for a few minutes. All right. And I don't see any questions coming in, so we'll wait. So it is 2:36 p.m. on my computer here. So let's just give people 2 minutes to decide if they want to ask questions. So we will close the webinar at 2:38 p.m. So that's approximately 90 seconds from now. So if there are any questions, please ask them now. And again, like I said, we do this once a month. So please join us again next month if you'd like to learn some more, or bring a friend or a colleague along.
Yeah, it was either too informative or there was too much information. Either way, please, if you have any questions afterwards, you can always email me as well. I'm happy to answer any emails around global talent stream, work permits, general immigration questions.
All right. You're very welcome. I just got a message on chat from one of the people attending saying, thanking us for the information. So you're very welcome, and we're glad that this was useful to you. That's what we're here for. We want to share and make things easier for everyone. All right, I think that's it. I think, Karan, I think you did a great job. Thanks very much for explaining this in detail. And like you said, there's probably a little bit of too much information, plus a lot of information well presented. So if questions come to anyone's minds, you can email Karan. It's karan@vanhack.com, and we'll be happy to answer them. But otherwise, thanks very much for joining us this afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you again. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks.